Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Ron McKeefery, and very excited to have Kelly Starrett on the show today. Kelly's a physical therapist, strength coach, and the author of The Supple Leopard, and really wanted to have him on the show, doing some phenomenal things with mobility. Been following him for a while, wrote the book, did a fantastic job of categorizing exercises, defining different types of mobilization, and I wanted him to come on and share some of those things with all of us. I really, truly enjoyed this conversation. He's a fantastic person, and I know you will too. A couple quick announcements before we get started. You know, obviously, Play Sports Performance is the sole sponsor of Iron Game Chalk Talk. They're doing some really fantastic things lately. Some great installs, Ohio State, Boise State. Fantastic product, fantastic people. So if you're in the market for some sports flooring, or even if you want to get an idea, make sure you reach out to them, and they'll be happy to help you out. Also, Strength on Demand is launched. You know, this is a program that Rob Taylor and I created. It's an online archive of strength and conditioning presentations, and really it's basically just an online clinic that you can access from anywhere, any device. So make sure you check that out, strength-ondemand.com. So sit back and enjoy this episode with Kelly. All right, guys, very excited today. Here on Iron Game Chalk Talk, we have Kelly Starrett, just a stud. He just produced, The Supple Leopard. You know, I got my copy here. Been trying to get him on for a while, and you know, he had the book launch, and then we were finally able to do it. So, man, I truly appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us.
My pleasure, Coach. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, Kelly, tell I know a little bit of your story, but kind of give everybody, from being an athlete to being now, having a doctorate in physical therapy and being a strength coach and owning a CrossFit gym and on and on and on. What was the evolution of that process? What got you into it, and then how did you get to where you're currently at?
Like everyone else, my whole life has been about performance. You know, I remember the first time I woke up that I was a performance whore. Well, I was 12 years old. I was at a high-level ski racing camp in Austria. The Austrian the world record, World Cup champion was diagramming the arc of a turn, talking about the technique and the angle of the boot and what we need to do. And and I remember being like, I'm 12, I am home. That's as early as I can sort of remember being obsessed with all aspects of training hard, working hard. Thought I wanted to play football, lived for it. Remembered at some point when I went to the University of Colorado that I was small and slow, and picked up kayaking again and paddled on the national team in a different sport, and paddled until my hand went numb, until I had a real bad neurologic problem, and was paddling 300 days a year, twice a day, doing what everyone said I needed to do. We were trying to obsess about nutrition and mechanics and all things, and all of a sudden, my body fell apart. Wow. And when I started kind of digging down on that, I talked to everyone else, and they were like, "Oh, yeah, it's totally normal." I was like, "It's normal for my hand to be numb. Like this is my life,
That's
and
answer, right?
I can't turn my head. That's right." And they're like, "Well," and I looked at the other women on the team, and I said, "Hey, every one of these women has had a shoulder surgery." And they were like, "Well, that's right." And I was like, "So if my daughter's dream is to paddle on the national team, I can pretty much guarantee she's gonna have shoulder surgery?" And they're like, "No, yes, don't ask that question." and I remember being like, something is deeply wrong with this problem. And of course now I went through MRIs, cortisone, prednisone, ART, traction. Guess what? None of it made a difference. I still had a hot nerve root and ended up retiring. So that was sort of forced to retire from this professional life. And at the same time, knew I was deeply interested. My father's a physician. My mother's a psychologist. Sort of had this nascent idea. I became a kayak rep and was out surfing one day, and I literally had a moment of satori. And I saw how I could suddenly integrate this idea about the training I was doing, and and remember, this is the dark ages. Remember, like, you got the book about plyo training from Donald Chu, and it was like this big, and you flipped through it, and it was like a stick diagram of. I mean, you couldn't get it. You had to like translate the Russian novels. I mean, you could get Mel Siff super training, and that was it. And I remember realizing I needed an Olympic lifting coach, and it took me 2 weeks to find a number on a weird page website that was 17 down to find Jim Schmitz, Coach Schmitz, in South San Francisco, which was a drive to a basement, couldn't buy Olympic lifting shoes. I mean, it was the dark ages, right? So I start realize I got to go to grad school, going to get a doctorate. So I go to get a physio, and at that time is when I bumped into CrossFit. And what's interesting is, people don't understand sort of what we're doing in CrossFit. But what CrossFit did was it forced me to become really competent in powerlifting.
Yeah.
And in that time, since we've opened our gym, I've worked with, Donnie Thompson, AJ, I've got my hands on all the great powerlifters, which has been great. And I've lifted with them and squatted very heavy and went down that road and still work with Mark Bell and Jesse Burke extensively.
Yeah.
And so that really forced my thinking, okay, here's classic strength conditioning. Here's the root of movement for strength. Okay, got that. And then I also was confronted with, hey, you've got to be a good Olympic lifter. And as a young coach, it's one thing to power clean and hang power clean like Mike Boyle does. It's another thing to teach snatching. Mm-hmm. And teach snatching to kids, and teach snatching is, it's a skill to adults and skill to Olympians. And fortunately, I ran into Mike Bergner. I get my hands on Glenn Penley. I suddenly get all of these masters teaching me to Olympic lift. And again, in that spirit of all the coaches I've ever met who are, inspirational are like, here's everything I know. Let's see if you can be better.
Right.
And then I learned how to run. Then I learned how to sprint. Then I learned how to, and suddenly what ends up happening in my own practice, which is we're starting to catch all of the dysfunction. And, when athletes and coaches are talking with rehab, there's a real disconnect. There is this low-level thing that's the rehab model, individual. And we pull athletes out, and they're not training, and athletes can't even reconcile, hey, I've been an athlete 20 years, and suddenly I'm doing this thing that doesn't feel very athletic, and I'm not even sure it's making me athletic again. It's making my fitness is worse. And yet, this is the language of modern strength conditioning. This is how we go to the Olympics. This is how I get someone ready for the NFL Combine. Like, right. Why are those things so disparate? And what we started to figure out was I had a language of diagnostics at my tool. Because remember, clinical doctorate means I have 10, off the top of my head, I have 10 correlates that I can do to find out if your lumbar is loose, right? Yeah. But as a strength coach, all I need to do is watch you box squat and deadlift and put something over your head. And I can tell, it doesn't matter if your lumbar is loose or not,
right.
I can tell if you're in a good position or not, period. And using those correlates to confirm what I already can see with the language of movement, which also happens to be the language of strength conditioning, suddenly I realized, what we need to do is repurpose this language, because strength and conditioning is not just about being stronger.
Right.
It's not just about being fitter. It's also about expressing skill.
Right.
This is the physiology and the human function. And what we're finding is, and it's so funny because, we have been working on the same set of problems for as long as there have been coaches around. So you hear these old coaches say things like, I like the bench press. It ties the arms to the body. And you're like, excuse me, coach, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, what it meant was they figured out, but by teaching to break the bar, what we're really doing is creating a torque and stable shoulder. And kids who understood that principle tackled more efficiently.
Right.
We kid around. People are like, I don't like the bench press. I'm like, I love the bench press. It's not the only way I measure function and power, but it teaches a movement skill that teaches stability in tackling and pressing. That's the archetype for creating, distance and separation control in a combat sport. I still have to teach thumbs up and elbows in, but that's the same position I dip in. That's the same. So we started to understand that the gym was the perfect place to lay down the movement principles and connect the dots for athletes. Because, the answer forever was just get stronger. And I was like, well, how much stronger do I need to be? Is squatting 500 enough if I'm a running back? Squatting 600 enough if I'm a running back? Right?
Yeah.
Do I need to squat 300 front squat? Or what? One of my best friends, played football at Cal. And his strength coach, a really good strength coach there, who was an Olympic lifting guy, and the guy was like, look, if you can snatch 100 kilos, you're probably athletic enough and mobile enough and fit enough to do anything we need to do playing football. Right. And just think about asking any one of our athletes who comes to us to overhead squat 100 kilos or snatch 100 kilos.
Right.
Litvinov, who threw, greatest hammer thrower of all time, still top 3, that guy could muscle snatch 100 kilos for sets of 10.
Wow.
And at some point, you're like, okay,
that's enough.
That's enough, and it feels so far removed because the role of the strength and conditioning coach now is so evolved.
Right.
We are now in the role of diagnostics. For me, in managed healthcare, the strength and conditioning coach potentially has 3 to 5 contacts a week, and so with an athlete, with a patient, with a client, and what's happening. Let me give you an example. We had a young coach, brilliant coach, who's been working with this young kid forever. And remember, one of the things that's got to happen is that our conditioning, our programming has to scale from my beginners to my veterans. It has to account for my injured athletes, right? I've got to be able to program for them. I've got to use the same template. It's got to work with my moms and dads. It's got to be integrated. It's one system. You know, as an example, you know, Litvinov used to, we use him again, used to do, he'd front squat 200 kilos for 7, right, which by itself, just ask the average athlete to actually front squat 200 kilos for 7, and then you run 400 meters. And right, in physical therapy, we have this thing called the timed up and go. You have to get up out of a chair, you walk 3 meters, you turn around, sit in the chair. Well, that's 1 squat, 6 meters, you know, 7 squats, 400 meters.
Right.
That's the same thing. Right. And you put a clock on them both. You measure output, you measure wattage, you measure time. So it's got to be scalable. So this young coach working with young athletes, and we're listening to a lot, there are a lot of coaches out there who are listening, work with young athletes. Suddenly, this kid's a young, brilliant thrower. He's reasonable. He's not overtrained. You know, he's doing the number of pitches. That's right. His shoulder doesn't hurt. But all of a sudden, he starts deviating in his squat. He starts swinging over to the left. Swinging over left. And it's something new because the coach has worked with him forever. He's like, hey, what's going on? So they try to solve it. They look at his hips, look at his ankles, look at his quads, they look at his motor pattern. They send him upstream, and it turns out the kid has developed a gigantic functional scoliosis in his mid-back because he's throwing so much on one side.
That makes sense.
And so the doc finds that, but the only reason they diagnosed it was because the strength coach saw it. And so now they can manage it. And so now, guess what that kid gets? He doesn't get a barbell, he gets dumbbells.
Yeah,
right? Because the prescription's still the same. I need this kid to squat and snatch and press and pull, but we've got to make that left arm work a little bit harder. And I can undo that little stiffness in the spine on that side. If we know he's getting short, we can start to manage that, keep an eye on, boom, now we don't have a problem that blows up in his first year of college. Right?
You know, there's 2 things you mentioned in there that I really want to point out and reiterate is one, you know, CrossFit's kind of taken on this polarizing type of persona. You know, either as strength coaches, you like it, it's cool, or you're so anti CrossFit that it's almost like a religion that you feel like this need to go out there and bash it. You know, and you know, you're reading your book, and you know, I've always been an open strength coach. You know, just different ideas and principles and things, but it really touches on, you know, when you mentioned torque, you know, and you know what CrossFit does a great job of is, you know, incorporating some gymnastics type of principles in, and you know, ring dips, ring push-ups are, you know, some of the best teachers of torque, you know, and
you nailed it, 100%. So I've got this program that has this broad palette of movements, which exposes my athletes. I don't have to program it, right? Do my football players, you know, do a lot of thrusters with barbell? Nope. But we do a lot of kettlebell work, front squat to press, front squat to press. That's honest work, right? So you're right, you know, and not to interrupt, you know, but people don't understand that what we're doing is I'm taking a position. Show me that you're stable in this position. Show me you're stable in this position under load. Show me this position when you got to do more than 1 rep. You start to get tired. Show me you're stable in this position when you're breathing hard and when you're competing and when you're moving fast. And it turns out that if you show me that you can keep your back flat in the same setup, the same way every single time, then I know you're going to set up. You know, let's use just an example. Peyton Manning has a diagnosis of congenital stenosis, right? He's got narrowing of the facet joints in his neck. Do you think, have you seen that guy's forward head on neck position? He does not have congenital stenosis. He's a quarterback. He leans forward and cranks his neck back, which weighs 10 pounds, with another 8-pound helmet. And he's been doing that since Vietnam, right? So, you know, since Pee Wee football. So the real question is, how do I unload that? Well, I know his thoracic spine's stiff because I see him. So, boy, we can fix that because I diagnosed that because he was having a difficult time pressing dumbbells over his head, right? And then also, how do I create a better, stable platform for him to get his torso upright? Well, that's the language of Olympic lifting. So if I get his feet straight, have him to create a little bit more torque, suddenly his setup is a little bit more upright, and he unloads that neck, and now his positions are better, his feet work is faster, he doesn't have to go from a forward position, he's already much more forward and loaded, still with a vertical shin, and that's what's nice is that, you know, we've been, you know, the strength coach forever has been hammered against, like, you know, the gym strength does not transfer to the field strength. You've heard this and had to fight this stigma, right? Every coach in the world is like, it's not true. Yet we get these freaksos who are genetically very gifted, know how to create torque automatically off of a sandbag, get in these good shapes. And the problem is, if we don't teach what the point is, not just being stronger, but the reason we squat with our feet straight is that you can't do pass defense with your feet turned out like a duck. You get beat.
Yep.
And, you know, your three-point stance, you can't run like a duck because you're dumping torque, and there's your ACL, and there's your collapsed valgus foot, and your navicular's on the ground. So why are we teaching kettlebell swings or even the basic language of power cleans, and why is it okay to jump and land like this? That's not the best physiology. I can spot the problem, do the deep practice and work, and resolve the dysfunction as we go. And so all those things start to build in, and suddenly the gym isn't just the, you know, it's not just a place to get kids stronger. It's a place to find every problem and teach every perfect movement pattern. Look, ACL injury rates in kids up 400% in kids under 12. So how are we doing? Let's give ourselves a grade. Female athletes are still tearing their ACLs at a rate of 4 times men, 3 to 4 times men. So how are we doing? What we said was, oh yeah, well now we know it's the trochlear notch, it's the Q angle, it's the hormones. I'm telling you, women have been around for 2.5 million years. There is no difference. The difference is you're letting your kids jump and land with crappy foot positioning. When they front squat, you're letting their knees come in. Why is that okay? Because practice makes perfect, and practice makes permanent. There we go. You know, so that's what's happening. Right?
I just preached that to my daughter this morning when we were working out in the garage. She was Q angle and just good positioning, landing positioning. You're so right. You're so right, and it's blatant when you see it. And it kind of brings me to my second point. You know, was so much of strength and conditioning anymore. You kind of fall into these different categories of, oh, you're just a monitor. You're just a guy to go yell and scream and motivate, and or you put so much time and effort and research into developing the program that you forget to implement the program.
That's right.
Or if you're doing a great job, you're a great practitioner. And I think that's where what you're talking about is, the job doesn't stop once you create the program. The program's the program. The job is to make sure you're implementing the program, and you're not just over there, joking with the guys or counting reps. You're actually diagnosing things.
And it's people don't realize how meticulous it is. Let's look back. This has been done for us. My Olympic lifting coach, sensei, Olympic coach, Mike Bergner says, hey, 90% of missed lifts are lost foot position. Well, that sounds a lot like your skill coach playing, right?
Yeah.
Why did Joe Montana do 15,000 reps of his drop back? Foot position, foot position, foot position. So we start to see this. Well, why isn't the coach taking the same skill? I mean, I think it's interesting that if we use football as an example, do you guys film every rep on the field?
Oh yeah,
pretty much.
Absolutely, every rep.
Does every player get to see themselves in every rep? Pretty much.
Yep.
What if we took that same idea to the weight room?
Yep.
Hey, I noticed in that third set of that heavy triple, you lost your knee. What's going on, Smith? Like, you're out of here. I mean, like, I just fined you $1,000. And so I think when we start really hammering people on the details and explaining why details matter, not because I care, but because this is the deep practice. It allows kids to get stronger. Look, we prioritize the movement first for a couple reasons. One is that when you move better, you don't get injured. When you move better, you stop being hurt from your movement pattern. That's why you're injured, besides a collision or some bad thing happened to you, which happens sometimes.
Right.
But why do you think we see incidences of spondy and spinal fractures? Well, it turns out that if I don't know how to create torsion in the hip, then I'm going to default, pelvis comes forward. It feels mechanically stable because I'm bone on bone there, and I got away with it for a long time, and I'm 6'6" and 300 pounds and an All-American.
Yeah.
But we know what that experiment is. That's not the best position for the spine. How do we know? Well, you can't squat as much. You can't farmer's watch as much. So when we start teaching the kids that this shape, this robustness, this ideal position, which we test under load, we show that you got to be able to do it. I'm interested, we'll just do a set of burpees and then deadlift 100 kilos. Show me some grass drills that you're breathing hard, that you can get set in that bottom position. Boy, that's as football as it gets, right?
Right.
And so suddenly we can really start to drill down and solve the problems in real time. And something you said, I think is, we need to respect how difficult the job is of the modern strength and conditioning coach. You're at a big university. You're at a Tier 1 military asset. You're a college program. You're a national team. you're terrified of injuring your athletes, right? Because, that's my job. And so you start making – versus if I always put my athletes in the best position possible, they never get injured. Not in the weight room. In fact, I solve problems because I can see problems, right? So, but in that hour or the last 30 minutes, you get kids during the season, twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. Right. We were talking about the University of Michigan, that coach there brings his guys in on Sunday, they weight train. Turns out we kick up all those enzymes and, pull that stuff. They're not stiff. We got to get kids turned around. We still got to rebuild motor patterns. We got to reclaim their nervous systems. We got to talk to them about nutrition, sleep. God forbid they're student athletes eating pizza and drinking beer and messing around with girls. How dare they in college do that?
How about
stuff,
their HRV on that deal?
That's right. And I tell you, I had one of my college head strength coaches down in Southern California. We were talking about some of the problems he was seeing, and I was like, do this for me. Just take a little informal poll. Make your guys count the number of hours they're sitting, right? And it turns out those kids were sitting 12 to 14 hours a day. So if you're sitting 12 to 14 hours a day, what do you think happens to your anterior hip capsule, your psoas, your quads? And then I'm going to ask you to stand up and run full speed. And what's going to happen is you can stand up and run full speed, but your knee starts to hurt. You're going to dump torque to go around these problems. You're losing time. So he just made some simple changes about the way they manage that, the kind of thinking about those problems. And my point is, your time is so compressed. We've got about nutrition and performance and mechanics. You're dealing with injuries. You're keeping kids in the field. And yet you still got to get people stronger, which is simple. You still got to get them faster, right? And you got to get them integrated and solve problems. That is done at the coach level, 1 hour at a time. We don't have to solve every problem today. Today, this is the movement goal. We are going to power clean, and you have to receive the power clean in a position where you can then front squat it, right? And, that's the goal. And here's our, 8 sets of 3 or whatever. You understand that? The loads I can manage, because for us, I really respect the, Louis model. I always want you strong year-round. Maybe I'm not cooking it, 90% all the time. I'm cooking 70, 80%. But this goal of, every detail matters, every position matters, and, following this percentage is really difficult. Right. Because it's difficult to make, hey, that kid ended up playing 50 snaps. He got on the bus at 2 in the morning. They took an Ambien at the pro level. I barely got, oh, now he's going to be 72.4% of his one rep. I don't think so. Here's the movement goal for the day. We're going to find a heavy single and get some work done. And the quality position for me, the movement is the diagnostic, whether or not I can push it or not. Right.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I think one thing that you mentioned in there, and this, one of the biggest challenges us college and pro strength coaches are facing are the time and staffing restrictions. I mean, when you talk 100%. About you got 50 guys in there, providing that one-on-one type of coaching becomes difficult. And with pro you got 9 weeks, and then they're off for 4 weeks. Before the season, when the time that they should be peaking.
Well, and you said, and this is why we really we see that the best programs we force everyone to say, look, your training partners are your coaches. You're responsible for his set. What did Louis Simmons say? I've been coached in every set of squats I've ever done my whole life, either by his coach or by his training partner. Right. And you build this feedback mechanism where guys are accountable to each other, women are accountable to each other. So, and I understand the realities. I mean, I worked with San Jose State last year, the women's swim team. Came in, girls didn't have an understand how their bodies worked at all. They ended up being WAC champions. We had 38 girls, not a single one had shoulder pain at the end of the year. We didn't lose a girl to injury, which is pretty amazing in a swim team. Right. But what ends up happening is the meticulousness of they understand that this is their secret weapon about position. The coach can then spend time working with the athlete who really needs it, the coaching, and I have suddenly 50 coaches coaching each other. Does everyone understand the movement goal? Great. If he bends his back during this next pull, your ass is on the line. Right. Guess what? People get it. Right. And they get that they're responsible to it. They get that suddenly it's about teaching athletes to be athletes and teaching them that this is what athletes do and this is why we care. And what ends up happening is that the athlete goes faster, they feel better, their performance goes through the roof, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And, once you've been the head coach for 2 or 3 years, suddenly you got some juniors and seniors who come around and understand your program, and they're teaching the young kids. There's a work ethic set up, and you know what? People respect the coach. You're like, we're not doing stupid busy work. One of my friends last year at the NFL, guy gives him a card. It's like 3 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 10 back, and he's like, are you kidding me? Like, what is that? He's like, abs, buys. Like, what are you doing? So at some point, the basics work really well. Right?
No doubt. You can't tray it too far from the meat and potatoes. But two things you mentioned, one off camera and then one just now is, these athletes are becoming more informed consumers, aren't they? They're getting their information, but sometimes they're getting the wrong information just as easily as the right information.
We all agree. The bread and butter is, can you deadlift? And if you can't deadlift, or pulling off blocks, or we need a trap bar, we got to get some pulling. We back squat, but I love front squatting. Front squatting solves all the problems. Maybe it translates better to upright sports because I force your torso to be upright, and then maybe that I can be absolutely stronger, but I also have more range, et cetera, comma. All of the strict movements, point A to point B with good control.
Yep.
Put the joints in their best position. Then I can open it up.
Right.
So the language is there, the practices are there. The meat and potatoes are there, but it's a tough job, and yet we got to still go in there and do it.
Right. Well, I think what you touched on was making sure that we're holding these lifting partners and these other athletes accountable to what's necessary, and then something you mentioned off camera was we talked a little bit about strength coaches and athletic trainers and sports medicine staff, and kind of had this internal flight that exists.
Absolutely.
In the archaic days, when really, with all these NCAA rules and pro rules and things like that, we should be dragging those trainers into the weight room and using them as helping us be practitioners and spotting
100%. Well, what we end up doing is we sort of see this, and it's common with every field, but
right.
The best places I know, the trainers lift with the team.
Yeah.
Trainers lift with the strength coaches. Strength coaches obviously are strength coaching. They aren't lifting during those times. But kids see the strength coach who can't bench or squat or train hard or is out of shape is a lie.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you're going to be the strongest or the fittest in the team, but you're working the limits of your mechanics. You can practice what you preach. Even if it's some scaled version of dumbbells hell, right? But if you start tearing down the walls, and then suddenly the training staff starts to develop the correlations. That kid, every time he jumps and lands, his knee comes in. We're treating him for patellofemoral syndrome right now. Okay, what's going on? We can start to build those correlates. The other thing that happens, and remember, it's for your listeners, is that it's nice to have this clinical doctorate in physio, and I'm practicing physio, and gets me access, and I can kind of walk between the two, right? And it also helps that I'm 6'3", 230. It's nice both these things, but we can shift so much of the bounty of performance back to the strength coach. Because for me, the strength coach is the center of the universe. They are the ones who's managing health. University of Southern Alabama, they take before and after photos. They use a bod pod at University of Michigan. They're forcing kids to drink. They only can get five meals a week in season. In college, it's tough, right, to manage those things. So how they end up managing those things at the urinal, there's a P chart. Kids are getting all that information constantly. Here's what it means to be an athlete. And then we can start to shift, recovery, why aren't you wearing your tights on the bus? That knee is swollen, jump in the VES, take it home before you get. So suddenly, some of the things that have traditionally been the domain of, because I always say, look, let the doctors and training staff deal with dislocations and the bad ankle sprains. That's their job.
Right.
The banged up stuff, the stuff that we can prevent is our job, and we can swing those tools and make it about performance again, right? Is your adaptation good enough?
No, that's really
how
good.
are we managing the quality of your tissues? Why did I have to wait until you have a pulled hip flexor before I figure out that you didn't have any anterior hip capsule movement and your quads were tight? So was your heel cord. So that's the stuff that we can start to shift around. It's not preventative. We don't care about injury prevention. We care about performance. It's the same conversation. So if your numbers are going up in the weight room, then we should also see changes in your position outcome and performance.
You're right. So one of the things that I really liked about your book and your system is it's so hard to categorize exercises and try to get this template of this is my I'm going to hold myself accountable to my principles, my my template, and I thought what you did in your book with the categorizing the different movements was awesome. What does it mean to be a supple leopard, and then what were some of those kind of categories?
Sure.
That you kind of put into the book.
Let's take on the concept of the supple leopard first. So the first thing is that the physiology of the human being is not a matter of opinion. We know what the best position for the shoulders. I can tell what full range of motion is. Do you have full range of motion in your ankle? Well, you should be able to squat down, ass to ankle, feet together, without your heels coming off the ground. If you can't do that, you don't have full range of motion in your ankle. It's that simple.
Wow. Which
actually expresses the bottom position of the pistol. So if we're talking about Achilles pathology, ankle impingement, plantar fascia problems, turf toe, guess what I'm seeing? That you don't have the primary range of motion in your ankle. I don't care if you do a pistol. I care that you have full range of motion. Your ankle can express it in a front squat or a full snatch, right?
Right.
Or cutting. What the heck happened to Kobe? I'll tell you what happened to Kobe. We know what his ankles were doing, right? He sprained his ankle, didn't have full range, went around the problem at Mach 10, blew his Achilles. So this notion of the leopard is that the leopard has full physical capacity instantaneously. It can attack and defend without activating its glutes, without it foam rolling, without having to warm up. The time in the weight room, for me, is sacred time. And I ask my athletes, are you ready to do the work I need to do? And my time in the gym is not time I'm diagnosing problems that we'll fix afterwards, but I need to work in the gym, right? And I'm not trying to get you ready for my workouts. That's your job.
Right.
Especially since you should instantaneously. Pavel was like, why don't you, talk about Ido Portal or these guys? Like, they're like, why can't you do this yet?
Right.
I was working with a brilliant athlete this weekend, and she's missing 100% of her dorsiflexion. 100% of her dorsiflexion. The bottom of her Achilles was like 4 inches wide. It was gross. She's a beautiful girl with this nasty heel cord. She turns her feet out when she jumps and lands. She's destroying. I'm like, how much force you're giving away? You know what I mean? Like, did you not notice that you didn't have any ankle range of motion?
Power.
And so, that's right. Well, any of my athletes. So we go in there, solving a complex problem for an Olympic lift this weekend. She's having a hard time in her lockout, right? And it turns out she was missing 100% of her internal rotation, so that when she's coming forward, she translates.
Right.
That means every movement she's doing, that pull and that push, the front rack, everything is compensated with that shoulder forward because she's had to spin out of position. So I'm like, why am I the one telling you that you are missing full internal rotation? So, if you're an elite athlete, it's a moving target. We know you're going to get stiff. We know you're going to get banged up and behind. I'm always looking for problems.
Right.
But we should have this notion of full physical capacity. Mm-hmm. So that's our goal. Are you a skilled human, yes or no? Can you do it? And look, I don't care, if you're that guy who's like, I don't want my quarterbacks pressing overhead with a barbell, great. Your quarterbacks better be doing Turkish get-ups, and they better be doing dumbbell presses overhead because they live in this overhead position. And where's the stable position? When they foosh, do they know what that looks like? So, at some point, my swimmers, for example, live overhead. That's the bread and butter. So we spend a ton of time in overhead movements working on that positioning. Do I have them doing a freak ton of heavy deadlifting? No. Some deadlifting because I need to be able to maintain a stable spine position. Right. But you can sort of tweak your program, but my athletes are still responsible for being full range of motion. And there's no excuse. And you're like, well, all my work is here. And I'm like, and when you tackle outside that window, what happens to your shoulder? It dislocates.
Right.
So what we did with the movements, because I'm like you, I'm like, God, I have so many things. How much power? And what we ended up doing is we typically categorize them around push and pull, which makes sense mechanically, physiologically, right? That's about movement, not about muscles, right? But what we started doing was we looked at basically the body. The shoulder has some primary shapes. It has some archetypal shapes. There's an overhead shape. There's a hang shape. There's a front rack shape. Whatever I'm doing that's a front rack.
Yep.
There's a press shape. Then we can look at how we take those archetypal shapes and how connected they are. So what we see is that when we start adding speed, like the difference between a press, I get to be well organized, to a press out, to a push jerk, well, suddenly I stop, it becomes closed chain, and I have to lengthen from both sides of the joint simultaneously. It helped me to organize those shapes. It helped me to make sense of my programming. What we saw was that gave me a template for rehab, so that if I have an athlete who's bad motor patterning, I can teach that stable position through a squat.
Right.
And I have an athlete who needs to work on some speed, or I need to challenge that position. Well, then I could start removing connection, jumping and landing with some of the power cleans or full cleans, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we found is that you couldn't hide your dysfunction as well when your foot came off the ground.
Yeah.
Here's an example. A physician friend sent me a picture or a little video of one of his son's friends jumping the trampoline, and the son has cerebral palsy. And this says it all, I think, and I should probably write a little post about it if I get his permission. But the kid has to walk with braces, right? But when he's bounced on the trampoline, he doesn't need his braces because his feet are connected.
Yeah.
And when both his feet are on the ground, he's able to create enough torque through the system where he can then move forward without using his braces, right? He can hop, but because he can locomote on both feet together, the whole system becomes mechanically stable. Well, it turns out sport is all about this change in direction, unilateral loading. So how am I programming that, right? I'm not necessarily programming just it's always in a perfect position. Yeah. I always get to hide the torque. And that's why we see athletes are getting injured when they cut. And I couldn't necessarily solve it because I wasn't teaching the jumping and landing. I wasn't teaching what that stable foot position has to be spontaneously.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, do you remember Jay Schrader and Adam Archuleta? Remember that phenomenon? Well,
it's funny you mentioned. I just watched that video last night.
It's great. But what did he end up doing? He ended up having all his kids Olympic lifting without bars.
Yeah.
They were jumping and landing. What he was teaching was torque generation, not just force production, but positioning. Mm-hmm. And Dave Camarillo, great MMA fighter, he's like, what? Position before submission. And so when we start saying, hey, we're going to value positioning mechanics first, and then we're going to start to layer on complexity of that with speed and load and metabolic demand, and I'll tell you, I was going to say earlier that, what's happening now, too, is we get kids who come in who are not prepared for the collegiate level sport. Right. They don't have good strength and conditioning systems in their high schools. They come to high school poorly prepared. They're drinking Mountain Dew and eating Hot Pockets and playing video games. Right. Talk to the guys at the Marine School of Infantry, which is 2 points here. The Marine School of Infantry has 85% of the guys retire in full disability. Right. So at some point, that's not because they've been blown up by IEDs. That's because they have patellofemoral problems and collapse. Like it's a disaster. But also, they're finding out that the kids are coming in, don't know how to work. They don't have the robustness or the bone density, the mechanics. I was talking to our coach at the, recently, just yesterday, and he was saying that, 10% or 10 out of the 30 kids that came into this recruiting class all had ACL injuries already. Right. And all had 3 surgeries on their knees. Right. And they're 17, and you're like, what's going on? Right. He said a full 10 of those kids have pain when they air squat. And you're like, okay, well, we're about to play Division I ball. That's right. You guys are in a world of hurt here. That's right. So what's going on? And what's going on is we're not teaching kids. And it doesn't mean, I don't mean fundamentals. I mean, this is how the human body works. And the formal language of the strength and conditioning gym is the best way in the world to teach these skills. Well,
it's obviously that, we've made this point before as well on the show that, these kids are playing video games nowadays instead of running, jumping, calisthenics, gymnastics.
So that's the first part of it. Because I'm like, great, you're doing that? So I go up and show up my daughter's volleyball program, right? 40 kids, 38 girls jump when they have a valgus knee force. Boom, knees come in. 38 out of 40. There's 2 girls. One was my daughter, one's your friend, who jump. When they jump, their knees stay where they're supposed to be. They actually knees out when they jump because they know how to push press, right? Right. An 8-year-old can push press. So, if we have 2 things. One is, are you doing it, yes or no? Right. But now we can be more sophisticated. Are you doing it right, yes or no? That's right. And now we can be more sophisticated. Are you eating right to do it right, yes or no? Now we're more sophisticated. You got 3 hours of sleep. You don't know how to downregulate. Your tissues are stiff. And your nutrition sucks, and you don't know how to move. And I appreciate you're a genetic freak, but I want to get an extra 5 years out of your pro career.
No
so
doubt.
What are we talking?
No doubt, you're right. One of the chapters, at the end of the book, just your mobilization techniques was really an eye opener for me. Because I'll be honest, I was a typical, let's get on the foam, roll and roll. And it was eye opening to me the different types of mobilization that you talk about, and then even the process in which it's supposed to be done. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, what we try to do is take on a systems approach. And look, people have been beating on the soft tissue forever, and that's an important aspect of it. I honestly think a foam roller is really a child's toy. Mm-hmm. My kids balance on it using the surfboards, and that may work well for like a middle-aged woman who's detrained and runs a little bit every other day, but it doesn't work for serious athletes. So on the one hand, I need a set of tools that are a little bit more sensitive, i.e. vicious, right, gnarly. I mean, when you hold a 100-pound D-ball on your back on a couple of lacrosse balls, suddenly I've got your attention. I'm probably getting into the thoracic spine. Why? Because that's what I had to do to get into the thoracic spines of my powerlifters and Olympic lifters, right? Coupled with the fact that we typically weren't taking the systems approach. We weren't working on the joint capsule. We weren't working on specific positions. I call it press and guess. Well, I rolled my quads, and then I hope it changed something. You know, it didn't change it this time. A lot of athletes know that that's bullshit, and they stop doing it, right? So we can be very specific. The other thing is, you know, I feel like we need 10 or 15 minutes of good work done. Now we'll get, because I've already warmed you up. We did hip grinding, skill transfer. We got hot, sweaty, got stronger. Now we're going to work 10 or 15 minutes. That respects the athlete's time. That respects the athlete's intention and energy. Respects the coach's time. You owe me a 10 or 15-minute block for every session that you train. That's easy. And that's done on your time back at the gym, in the hotel room with a band open on your hips. So what we try to do then is also, you know, where are those? We know no one stretches anymore before they lift, like before they play. We just don't do that. We activate the nervous system. We get the heart rate up. We take you through full range of motion. You know, it turns out your muscles are a neuromuscular system, right? So pulling on a muscle is the equivalent of like trying to jump your car without turning the key on, right? You know, just it's not working. So, you know, by the time we have found that we get you into a better position, including your nervous system, we've got your hip into a better position, and we've dealt with the stiffness of your hamstrings, not the length, but the stiffness. You don't have a hamstring problem. We don't need to stretch those things. We need to deal with it. So the other thing is, you know, what is the best use of my time? What we find is that we like to save the big, heavy-duty soft tissue work for afterwards. And one of the reasons we save it for afterwards is everyone who's ever gotten a massage, when you get a massage, how'd you feel when you stood up? Like you wanted to lift heavy and fight someone? Oh, you were dead. Where am I, right? And that's because it has a down-regulatory parasympathetic response. So if I'm talking about, if I'm looking at heart rate variability, but I'm not doing anything to actually try to affect this parasympathetic sympathetic state, I'm just measuring chance, right? So one of the things we do is we like to get our athletes, we all can turn on 0 to 60 like that, but going from 60 to 0, talk to those guys. Man, I'm wired up. It's 2 in the morning. Like I'm still awake. You know, how do we bring them back down? Getting them into the habit of saying, hey, here's how we recover. Here's how we recover tissues. Here's how we identify problems. We're gonna roll this stuff out that helps us sleep better. Let me use an example. One of my friends, who's a great therapist, was working with a serious NBA player who had to smoke a joint and foam roll just to go to sleep every night after a game. And what the guy had figured out was he was down regulating, right, with the marijuana. He was using that chemical down regulator and then the foam rolling, and that's what allowed him to sleep and feel better and actually get some good night's sleep. So obviously we have some better models than, hey, you know, you're a 16-year-old athlete, here's a medical marijuana prescription. But what we found out was we typically go after the joint capsule first. And that's what's stiff. We can put the joint capsule in a good position. We can do some loose kind of global shearing if we need to. But by the time sort of, you know, I try to think about the mobility work as a discrete skill set of transfer exercises for my position. I can use some of those things for my warm-up. And hips tend to get very stiff. So for some of my collegiate soccer teams, for example, they bring a bag of green bands out, jump stretch bands, they drop them on the field. And instead of doing just walking lunges with the hip capsule tight, each athlete spreads them apart. They do walking lunges and can open up the hip capsule quickly. And now they're prepped for the actual warm-ups, right? So we can kind of hit 2 birds for 1 stone. So I tend to save the heavy-duty, you know, beat down myofascial stuff for after. And I tend to use the joint capsule position stuff before if I'm having an athlete having a problem.
Well, this is one of the main questions I wanted to speak with you about was, you know, you take, you know, going back to those coaches and this is the way we've done things for 100 years type of approach. You know, for a guy like yourself that travels, that's gone to NFL programs, to college programs, you know, that pre-practice, you know, warm-up, stretch, you know, that's got to make you cringe a little bit, doesn't it?
Well, I always say, you know, people are working at the limits of their understanding. And I really feel like, have you ever met a strength coach who just doesn't give a crap?
No.
Or the young strength coaches are like, show me a better way. They're constantly reading, they're constantly trolling the internet. In fact, they're probably spending 15 hours a day at the gym. I mean, like, don't get married to a collegiate strength and conditioning coach, right? It's a bad deal.
Yeah, that's my wife.
And so, so the issue here is, what are the best uses of the time?
Right.
And when we show people a better set of tools,
what's that model look like for you?
What's that?
What's that model look like for you? Okay, so the kids show up. They got some meetings. They got maybe a 10-minute window before they have to be on the field.
Right.
They're gonna do their specialty, and they're gonna run around a little bit for about 10-15 minutes, and then there's gonna be a stretch time or a dynamic warm up time. If you were thrown into that situation, you're the head strength coach for the Cincinnati Bengals. Coach Lewis comes in and says, you got 10-15 minutes. After meetings, you got 10-15 minutes. At the start of practice, after they've kind of ran around a little bit. What would you do in a team setting?
Well, what I would do is I would say, we know what's nice about this is I don't have to prepare for every variable.
Right.
And I know specifically what's going to happen. So, where are we making most of our money? In hip extension,
yep.
Right? And so does my athlete have both hip flexion and hip extension? Are those the things that I'm doing? How am I – remember Pavel's book, Super Joints?
Yep.
Well, how simple a concept. Are you taking your joints through full range of motion, yes or no? And we're seeing that athletes aren't. And I don't mean sitting down and moving your ankle around. That is a waste of your time.
Right.
But, it's not an accident that when you crawl out in a lunge and your other hip is behind and you're grinding through the capsule and exposing the ankle to this position, what we should be doing is really spending time getting athletes to shift the blood from their guts to their body, getting them ready, right? Waking up the nervous system, warming up the synovial tissue, all the synovial fluid, so we're a little bit more limber, getting blood flow going. But also, for me, it's about priming the nervous system for knowing where those end range positions are, and then getting, waking up some of those tissues so that kids' elbows don't hurt, Right. And if you're doing enough, push-up drills where we're getting some movement, priming the goals, then suddenly the second the game starts and kids are hitting, the shoulders already, it looks like very much the same thing I'm doing in the gym, right?
Right.
In fact, if we can start to correlate so that athletes know what they need to do to get prepped, throwing in a band in there is super simple. Like I basically could give you a 5-minute band hip opener that could be, we could probably reduce 100% of femoral acetabular stuff just in give me 5 minutes of work. We could reduce hip flexor pulls forever just because what we're doing is we're actually changing the hip capsule tissue. Won't monkey with the brain. So we don't have to throw out. These warm-ups are pretty good.
Yeah.
Like there's some really good stuff. Staying on a single leg, pulling your knee all the way to your chest, taking out in a big lunge. That's just taking your hip through full range of motion. But if your hip capsule's still tight, it's not in there. So, our warm-ups in the gym end up looking like, skill prep.
Right.
And am I taking those joints through full ranges of motion? Like, I'll show we did a kind of a well-known video called squat prep, where you basically put, the other leg's behind you, the one leg's up, we shove the knee out, and then changing the position of the body to open up the hip capsule, let the leg fall out on the side, so you start buying some external rotation, same thing, and you can't believe how fast that opens up the hips and how much better function you have, you know? And so, when they were doing those studies where they were looking at, running economy, and after guys squatted, they ran better. Well, revolutionary. I love the Niners recently where there was a big deal about their progressive stretching program, right? Yeah. And the coach literally said, we do box squats. And I was like, that's stretching? You mean you're actually forcing your athletes into good mechanical positions and they groove those patterns over and over? Like, that's not stretching. What are you doing? Right. I think it ends up, we don't need to hook a band on our guys' legs and pull them across. Like, that's not a good use of our time, So, I think that there's a few things that we can do to tweak it. But remember, the premise is my athletes are pretty much ready to go on the field all the time anyway.
Right.
Because I've given them full range of motion in the gym.
Yep.
I've reinforced those patterns in the weight room. That means you run around, open up your hips a little bit, start, Bella Karolyi, Russian gym coach, his men used to play indoor soccer to warm up. They already had full range of motion. They just played indoor soccer.
Yeah. Yeah.
That seems like, we did an experiment with a team once where we got a bunch of Mashunga swords, the swords that are just like foam swords.
Yeah.
And we were like, here you go. Here's 20 swords. Kumite. And our athletes are like, that was the hardest warm-up I've ever done.
Yeah.
I'm sweating, my hips are open, and they're doing all this crazy stuff. I don't think that would look very good on a pro field, but you get the idea,
Yeah.
So what's nice is that I don't have to spend so much time. The warm-up is really taking the guys right through end range, letting their nervous system know, undoing some of the stiffness, last little tweaks because they're already prepped because we've done that. What we need to be doing is ask the question, why are guys sitting in meetings for hours and then trying to get ready for 10 minutes? What can we do in the meeting that may change that?
Yeah, that's great.
Can we get an ab mat down? Get those guys spending some time in a high kneeling position or a lunge?
Right.
Man, if they're in there anyway, why aren't we open the hips?
Yeah.
Throw the hip up in pigeon pose on the table. Now I've got guys working on hip flexion, external rotation, doing Faber for 20 minutes during the meeting. So now I can start to integrate those things.
Yeah,
and now I'm not undoing the sitting,
That's a great point, really. That's a really good point. Man, this has been awesome. I could go for hours. We've run an hour. I usually go 25 minutes. That's awesome. A couple of quick things that I always do on these things. What's a quote that you live by, or maybe one you got plastered in the weight room?
I was a professional kayaker, and we had a model for running really scary stuff and teaching people to run really scary stuff. We said, see your future, be your future. Hey, 1 second, baby. My daughter's here at the gym today.
Awesome.
Let's put her on here. Come on.
Yeah.
There you go, Bear.
Hi, sweetheart.
Hey, everybody.
How you doing?
So we say, see your future, be your future.
That's great.
And that meant specifically you end up going exactly where you're looking. And the converse to that is don't look where you don't want to go.
Right.
And so, we talk about that a lot. See your future, be your future.
Oh, that's awesome.
And, one of my friends was at church yesterday. She was like, to behold is to become. What you can imagine, you will attain. I mean, it really is that simple.
No, it is.
And the other thing that I would say that we say a lot and that was really important to me is Dune is one of my all-time favorite books. It's great sci-fi, but it's about a young prince waking up to his potential. And one of the things that they have to, he says a lot of is, this litany against fear. Fear is the mind killer.
Yeah.
We say that all the time. My daughters get a little bit nervous beforehand, before a swim meet or something. And I'm like, repeat after me. Fear is the mind killer.
That's
and
good.
She's like, fear is the mind killer. And so what we find is, we create a situation in our training room where we're making it so hard and so intense that we're going to exceed any capacity, any spiritual need, any physical need, any gut check need in the weight room. And that's what the weight room's about. So we start to believe in each other. We start to believe in our physical and mental capacities. So then I'm ready to do anything that's possible in the gym,
right
on the field. And that's what the gym is. The gym is a laboratory. The gym is the place where I can find and fail safely in front of my friends, in front of my coaches, so that I don't ever fail anywhere else.
It's a place where you can make the uncomfortable comfortable, right?
You got it. You got it.
Now, what about you got a great website, Mobility Wide. When you're trolling around, you're laying in bed and you're scanning the internet. Where are you going to check out material?
There are, I would say that chiefly right now, my friends on Twitter are the most unbelievable kind of thinkers. And what's happening, and I would say start following the coaches and some of the thinkers that you like, and they will feed you stuff because you don't have a lot of time to go troll very much.
No doubt.
One of the greatest things that I have going for me is that I am good friends with a lot of people. And so I get to pick their brains on high levels. And so I get to have some real conversations with masters about some of these things. But, the idea is, there's a couple books you probably should read and understand that are probably on your shelf, and you should really strive to understand them, Most important is, do you have a practice yourself? Because you're going to understand the squat mechanics a lot better if you're squatting. You're going to be able to solve problems in the Olympic lifts a lot better if you're Olympic lifting.
No doubt.
So that would be my. Do you have a physical practice? Yes or no? Are you if you're asking your athletes to go suffer and die, I'm expecting that you're going to be going a little suffer and dying too.
No doubt. Is there an app that you use personally, or an app that you recommend as far as, it could be as time management, it could be tracking, it could be anything that you just find
Two things.
useful?
Google Cal. Google Calendar integrates all your concepts.
Yeah.
Your timing is brutal. We live and die by Google Calendar because everyone can access it. Everyone can place on it.
That's awesome.
The second thing is we love Coach's Eye. We live by Coach's Eye because we're really good at seeing it. Recently, one of our good friends, we can see the stuff, but slowing it down for the athlete to see it over and over and over and over again, they start to build a picture in their head and can start to make the corrections. We got away from filming a lot of things in the gym because it's not efficient use of my time to pull out the video camera, film everything, break it down. But that's really such a valuable tool. It's easy with an iPad to quick make and even have athletes film each other and get immediate feedback what that looked like for the next rep or next set instead of just practicing. One of our friends we started filming some of our movements in 240 frames a second, which is, remember, normal frames is 24 frames a second. So at 240 frames a second, there are no places to hide.
That's right.
And it has really given us, like, people are like, oh, it's so bad to watch myself move like that. I'm like, welcome to the show. That's it.
Well, it hits on a great topic that we've talked about before. The athletes learn in 3 different ways. They learn verbally, they learn kinesthetically, but most athletes grow up learning visually because what do? They come off the field, they go right up to the film room, and they watch tape. And so integrating that into our training is a no-brainer.
I would say there's Alan Lim was the director of sports performance at Team Radio Shack. He's a brilliant exercise physiologist. He's the guy who got cycling to adopt a passport. He's just like an advocate for clean, dope-free, clean-free. He's just genius. But he looks at it this way, and I think this is such an important idea for coaches, that there's not this 1% gain, 1% gain, 1% gain. There are rate limiters. There are gigantic blocks. Athletes aren't drinking enough water.
Right.
Athletes aren't eating right enough. Tearing down those adherents. Guys come off the field. Here's an RTD ready to drink. Here's a bar. Here's a glass of milk. It's done.
Yep.
I'm sitting in the next meeting, not missing a window. I'm sitting in the next meeting, drinking my water with my electrolytes.
Right.
I'm sitting in the next meeting right now with a lacrosse ball on my hamstrings, on my glutes. I'm using my time wisely. Suddenly I can start integrating these concepts. Those sort of big performances, really coming to Jesus moments about sleep. When do you go to sleep? Is it dark? Is it cold? Do you try to get out of sleep and get up every time? Control what you can control.
Right.
Having those sort of conversations with our athletes and really making that part of this is the strength and conditioning system. You, as the strength and conditioning coach, are responsible for all of those elements.
Right.
And so now that stuff clears up, and it's amazing what happens when you just give athletes a chance to compete. They will never let you down.
Right.
Our idea is put the best athlete in the position where they can be successful. My job as a coach is to clear all the other BS away so that superstar can go make the big catch.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Well, hey, bro, I appreciate you coming on the show, man, sharing some of this stuff with us. Your book was awesome. I'd highly recommend that to anybody watching, as well as, I know you get out and speak and do some different things. What do you got coming up in the near future? Anything?
I'll be at Perform Better here coming up speaking. Okay. Just a regular thing. We're actually working on a couple big projects, a couple writing projects, and then some other courses. There's so much work. We started this MWAD Pro, the pro version of our site, because we felt like athletes and coaches needed sort of a graduate level education, taking on anatomy, taking on physiology, taking some of the other things. We feel like we just can't create enough resources for coaches. I love working with athletes, but my passion is to help coaches become better coaches.
Oh, that's fantastic, man. That's why I wanted you on the show. I mean, obviously we try to get innovators of concepts, but you're obviously, you're a guy that's a proven practitioner, but then you turn around and you're sharing your wealth of information with everybody. So I appreciate you doing that, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Coach. I appreciate you.
Okay, guys, before we let you go, a couple quick announcements. As usual, all the links that we mentioned in the episode with Kelly will be down below in the show notes. If you're on YouTube or listening to this in the car or something, just go to McKeefery.com, click the episodes tab, and find Kelly's episode, and all the links will be down below. A couple things I'd like you to do. One, go get his book, Becoming a Supple Leopard. Awesome book. Can't recommend it enough. There'll be a link down below for that. I think it's a great book that should be on your bookshelf. Second thing, comment. Let us know what you think of this episode. Let Kelly know. Let myself know. And we're always trying to make the show better. We're both trying to become better strength coaches. So anything that you can do or comment on, we'd truly appreciate that. while you're there on McKeefery.com, go ahead and enter your email in. I'll send you some updates from time to time, new episodes, things like that. Plus, you'll get a free ebook there, 365 quotes that you can use with your athletes. And lastly, check out Strength on Demand project that we just finished up. It's an online archive of strength and conditioning presentations. I think you'll really, really enjoy it. It's strength-ondemand.com. Check that out. Have a great week. We'll see you next week with another great speaker. And we'll all continue to learn together. Take care. See you.